Welcome, everyone, to the Born Primitive Outdoor Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Snyder, and today I have my partner in crime, Kurt Gamache, on the podcast. We're going to discuss the first Born Primitive Outdoor, outdoor and tactical course or backpacking course, along with a bunch of other cool stuff, because I'm sure we'll go down rabbit holes. So thanks for coming on, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it, Aaron. It's been a minute since you and I have been on a podcast, so looking forward to talking about the Academy and some of the things we have lined up for this season.
Yeah, no, it'll be good. Do you want to give everybody a brief kind of background of, within reason, I guess, of your experiences?
Yeah, and it's almost like I'm getting tired of having to explain myself, but it's important because there's a lot of people who have not listened in. But spent,
I can do it for you if you want. I've heard it enough.
No, I got it. No, I'm all in. Just retired from the military a little over 20 years. Most of that was in special operations, and I was in a reconnaissance element, so land navigation, mission planning is kind of a huge part of what I had done for the past few decades. And yeah, I just, as a result of that, I've naturally gravitated towards some of the more primitive skills involved with my discipline, and that naturally aligned with my passion of spending time outdoors. So woodsmanship, bushcrafting, survival skills. I put myself through a number of survival skills intentionally. And I just kind of grew my skill set out of my desire to be more capable overseas. And that's kind of what led me to, when I retired, wanting to find something that aligned with that. And Born Primitive was that door that was open to me. And I've kind of gravitated more from being in an operations role at this company and moving more towards product development and basically the academic courses that we're going to be offering to have landed.
Yeah, and the only reason why I have kind of you give your background is in today's day and age. Kurt doesn't have social media, and sometimes I think people forget it's not the following you have that gives you your experiences. It's experiences that give you that. So, yeah. Kurt has a lot of...
I totally understand it. And because I was the same way when I was in, if somebody was giving me a course of instruction, teaching me, you'd be like, who the fuck are you and why? What gives you the authority to stand up there and talk to me about whatever it is we're learning about? So it's important to kind of establish that framework. You can be like, okay, this dude has experience. He has that tacit knowledge to be able to relay this information in a way that is going to be acceptable, rather than somebody who just studies information and never applies it.
Yeah. So to sum it up, Kurt has a lot of knowledge, but he also has a ton of wisdom, which I've always tried to explain. Like, knowledge doesn't really mean shit if you haven't applied it. Wisdom is applied knowledge, and that's the most important. And Kurt has both, so that's good.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no problem. The good thing about Kurt, too, is about polar opposite from me, since I do everything half-assed, and Kurt is very finite in all his details. So you get kind of the best of both worlds with the courses. But the one thing we're finalizing the dates this week. We're going to have our... and I think they are finalized, but our first course will be a backpacking course. That'll be at the end of April. And it's really just going to be, a bunch of dudes backpacking in, brotherhood, breaking bread, friendship. And then we're just going to tell you, from different pretty simplistic tasks, like how you can maybe do those tasks, better those tasks, and some gear hacks and things like that. So pretty basic. We're just going to backpack in, make sure you know how to set up a tent correctly, some basic knot tying, how to build a fire, procure firewood, basic stuff like that, getting water. Pretty much, if I was going to go backpack hunting, or Kurt and I we're just going to show you how we do it and show you some tricks of the trade along the way on that course. And so, Kurt, with your background in bushcraft, and I say bushcraft preparedness really would be
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
explanation. You went to some survival schools, during while you were in the military, but as a civilian, and you took some of your teams through these courses. Some of the things that you learn and would teach, I don't dive into as much.
Right.
And again, whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't. I try to kind of mix the two, meaning I definitely think, building a fire is important, especially because I can't feel my hands half the time. So, like procuring firewood and how to build a fire in any situation. We'll cover that one first. Like you've done it
Yeah.
all the way from friction fires to, modern, fire starting. Talk a little bit about
Yeah.
procurement for firewood, what you've got in your kit. And honestly, how to build a fire. I've learned a lot of people, you got the TP method, you've got the, build a log cabin method, whatever, but talk about that a little
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's easy because I'm kind of a lot like you. I think it's why we get along so well together is like I'm very much a learner. So I seek information, and when I'm devoted to something or something piques my interest, I very much spend probably too much time researching and getting as much knowledge as I can before I start going out and doing like a practical. So when I was getting into like primitive skills, for example, fire starting was like, oh, cool. I really need to start with the most primitive form of fire making and then go from there. And I wasn't really comfortable until I mastered that. And I built like dozens of bow drill fires and was very successful at that, and had a lot of failures, obviously, that didn't result in an actual ember. So and it wasn't until then where I was like, okay, now I can move on to something a little less primitive. Then flint and steel onto a piece of char cloth, and then moving into making my own punkwood char material and my own char cloth, and then just kind of expanding upon that. And like my mentality now is I feel like I have a very solid grasp of a lot of those primitive skills, and I can do them if I need to. But what's more convenient for me is to use the modern method. So any sort of surefire or fire accelerant that can guarantee a flame in suboptimal conditions. And Bic lighters are a huge part of my fire kit. So when the weather is nice, I'm using that time to start the fire in the easiest manner possible. And then should I have any gaps in my kit, say I didn't bring any char material, but I know I may need it, then I'll like take that time on a nice day when I'm not so tired, and I'll just make some char material or fill up my stainless steel bottle with punkwood and make some char material like that I'll keep in my pack in a dry bag for a rainy day, literally and figuratively. So yeah, my mentality around fire is start out with the primitive skills and then move on to kind of the more modern, easier methods of starting a fire. But with regard to like how you lay the fire, and it's everybody, it's like CQB or tactics. Everybody has their own idea. I'm not 100% right, but what works for me is, always have a solid oversized tinder bundle, whatever that may be. However you acquire that from the area that you're in and the natural materials that are available to you. But I got to go overboard with the tinder bundle because I want every chance of success available to me to get that ember that I'm transferring to it to ignite. Or, if I'm throwing sparks off a ferro rod, I want enough material and surface area to catch those sparks to make it easier to ignite. Then it goes from like, small to big with regard to twigs and sticks and everything up to logs themselves. But with regard to starting that fire, it's the tinder. Then I'm either using char material or sparking a ferro rod right into it. I'm using fat wood shavings from fat wood that I either took with me because that's part of my kit, or that I harvest from the land. And then I don't care about building a log cabin or a teepee. I just take all of the like pinky size or less sticks that I can find, and I create enough air inside that fire lay, but it's just chaos. So I kind of like start the tinder bundle, then I just slowly like move it on top of that flame and just allow it to catch that way. I don't spend too much brain power trying to make it as pretty as possible. It's like fire is chaotic in itself and it loves chaos. So I just kind of feed that with, understanding that it needs fuel, air, and heat. And then I go to town that way. If I put too much shit on it and it takes too much air away, then it's going to die down. So just kind of understanding that and managing how much you put on is really the big thing.
And how this applies to the courses, and I want to make sure everybody understands as we're talking about this is directly coincides, with the courses, meaning we're not going to be doing too much primitive fire building on this first course. It's going to be more modern styles, but other courses that we offer will be, soup to nuts, and we'll offer everything. And an example, like when we're talking about this, because I build fires, I make jokes like I'm the best fire builder this side of the Missouri River or whatever, because my hands get so cold. I have to build a fire to work. I have to build a fire at times. And when people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, my fingers won't operate a lighter, and they certainly won't operate a ferro rod. And so the other day when we were fly fishing, it's probably like 14 degrees with maybe a 20-mile-an-hour wind. We were trying to fish, and it got to a point where my hands turned white and whatever. And so, where like Kurt and I, and specifically Kurt, can help with this is we got off the riverbed, hiked up on the side of the bank, found like a fairly good cut in the ground to get out of the wind. And when I sat down, it was funny because I went to grab my little fire biscuits I made. We'll go into that in a minute. And I looked behind me to grab some tinder, and I was under a cedar tree, which literally is one of the best. Like, so I'm peeling the bark off, wadding it up, kind of making it into like thinning it out, right? Making my bird's nest. And in, I don't know, 60 seconds I had, it was cranking, right? And so knowing, it's kind of like with fly fishing on the bug side of things, you also become kind of aquatic bug kind of dork, becoming an arborist, right? Learning what is the best wood, what's the best ways to get the fire going the best ways to get tinder is a big part of this. Yeah.
And that's huge with just knowing the area you're going to be in and the natural resources that are available to you. Like you said, cedar bark is huge. There's a number of other resources, and not only for, what is going to work best for a tinder bundle, but like what, trees or you can harvest to help you build the best bow drill set or whatever it may be. So absolutely. And that's going to be a part of these courses is we're going to be able to identify trees, plants, and in your case, because you're kind of a mushroom aficionado, some of those wild edibles as well, and just kind of be able to give people a baseline and stuff to be looking out for when they're out on the trail.
Yeah. And on my end, it's also going to be when we talk about the modern stuff, I usually carry, I have Bic lighters coming out of my ass. I carry a lot. Yeah. But I carry I don't have a huge ferro rod. Haha, that sounded funny. I do have a big ferro. No, I have a couple, I think they're eighth inch in diameter. They're pretty, they're very small. They're 3 inches long. I use them ahead of time to get that coating off, and I'll have one of those duct taped or taped somehow to one of my Bic lighters. I'll have one in my possibles pouch with make sure the back of my knife will operate that and get a strike off of it. So I always have something to get a fire going, and for me, it's extremely important. And so kind of showing that system, whether it's trioxane tablets or mini infernos that Pathfinder sells, or making your own, like I did a video on that. Those ones I made of my own actually work better than almost everything I've ever tried. Yeah.
And the longest burn time, produce some good heat. So yeah, definitely down and check out that video. Go look at it, make your own, save yourself some money. Those are huge. And a little hack that I do, and I got this from Dave Canterbury as well, is my ferro rod. I always throw a bunch of wraps of duct tape on there. I typically use Gorilla Tape because it comes in those 1 inch, the smaller rolls. And then I'll wrap a few wraps of duct tape around all my big gliders. And duct tape has numerous uses, from repairing gear. It can be used for first aid. And then if you process it down into strips, it is a pretty good fire starter as well. You process it down in a smaller strips, hit it with the big lighter, and that thing will ignite, whether wet or cold. And it'll be a nice little piece of tinder that you can use to get a fire started.
Yeah.
In a pinch.
Yeah, in a pinch. And I'm, that's all the kind of tricks of the trade. Like, the other thing too is this, and I'm not as, to my demise, right? I'm not as good on the preparedness side as Kurt is, but the one thing I've gotten really good at in the last decade is when I have like my Flycraft, the raft, right? I have a cooler on the back, which generally has nothing to do with keeping it cool, but it works for that. But I also will have my little safety pouch in there. And so, for me, I actually carry road flares a shitload, not on my backpack, right? But I have 2 road flares in there. Whether the boat flips over and somebody needs to come find my ass, I need to use it to build a fire. So then I have, it's just a Ziploc bag full of those little mini infernos that I built. I've got a ferro rod in there. I've got big lighters. The one thing I've started doing, and I have this in if I have my little pontoon boat, fishing boat in my truck, I carry a butane torch everywhere except when I'm packing it. And that thing, it is not primitive, but I tell you what, if you need to get a fire going, especially when there's wet wood, I'll just lock the lock the trigger down and just put it right at the base of wet wood, and it'll get going, right? And so it's just a matter of applied, what you're doing and what makes sense. Like, I'm not going to pack one of those in, but I tell you what, if I flip the raft over, that's a good way to make sure I'm going to get a fire going, like 100%. And again,
that's huge. Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me, and then there's nothing wrong with it. Always be seeking more knowledge, but there's plenty of dudes out there, who, if they're handed a big lighter and say, "Hey, go start a fire," they're kind of like stuck. They're like, "Shit, I don't know if I can do this." So the idea is like, let's remove all those barriers to entry and give you all the tools necessary so you can be confident when you go out. And it's like, knowledge is power. So the more knowledge that you have, the less gear that you have to carry, which is less weight that you have to carry on you. So nobody wants to take out a lighter fluid and a butane torch on a backpack hunt. So let's give you all the tools necessary to have your gear as light as possible and your knowledge as big as possible. That's huge. And you were talking about fishing. Like, I remember a few years back, there was a country singer, I think Craig Strickland. He ended up dying during for a boating accident. He was out duck hunting and his boat overturned. He got soaking wet and didn't have any gear on him to be prepared for that scenario, and he ended up dying from hypothermia. So it's unfortunate. So that no matter what you're doing, being as prepared as possible is going to be important, because it literally will save your life. Yeah. Or somebody else you care for that you're out with.
Yeah, no, and knowledge is power, and that's a very good way to look at it. And you kind of moving on, the other thing, above and beyond fire building, and these are basic things that are very easy to teach that people overlook. Knot tying, will knot tying save your life? It'll get you out of some problems. And when I say that, anything from hoisting game bags up into a tree, right, to a simplified way, I say simplified, getting rid of some maybe tension locks on your tent and having, taut line hitches for your tension lines. There's a lot to it. And even like tying, like a bowline, towing people out, generally they just tie a bunch of knots. They got to cut the rope. So it helps when you want to reuse whatever rope that you have or cord or whatever. So we're going to go into that quite a bit as well, because that's one thing I found is that is a lost art, and not that many people. They just basically if you can't tie knots, tie lots. That is not.
I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah, that is not true. That does not work well. There's a knot, not specific. There's usually 1 to 3 knots that work really good for multiple different things. So you can, whether you tie a prusik knot or a taut line hitch or a bowline or whatever, there's a lot of knots out there that it definitely, day-to-day life, tying down loads in the back of your truck, whatever.
Yeah, it can be daunting. I know it seems like looking at knot tying is like a little mystical to some people, but honestly, there's a couple knots that if you just master those, they'll work for you in 80% of the scenarios that, like you had mentioned, the bowline, the square knot. So it's like, learn a few of these knots and they'll serve you very well in a lot of areas, and it'll, just make yourself more efficient. That's the whole goal. It's like, let's be efficient with this. You could just tie a shit ton of knots overhand until it's like tight enough. But now, you're spending more time than you have to and being less efficient. So, we'll pick a couple very good, very versatile, basic knots, and we'll just get reps with them. And that's all it is. And it's super easy, and it kind of makes you feel a little bit more like a man, a little bit more confident and useful to not only yourself, but your team or your family.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, knowledge is definitely power. And we obviously, there's a lot we're going to cover in these courses, but like, again, on the backpacking side of things, going from like knots, the other thing is going through your kit and how to load your kit in your pack and being as efficient as possible. I overlook that a lot. Weight distribution in the pack, not just left to right, but bottom to top, how that works. And then, I don't have a gear list anymore because I've done it long enough, but having like, people will say things like, I don't want to carry a big pack, I just put more shit in it. That is a very, very bad way to live your life, right? And especially when you start to hike in, is being methodical in your gear list. And then as time goes on and you're learning how to dissect that gear list and what could be taken out, what could be put in, and what could be swapped out to make you more efficient, lighter weight, things of that nature. And we'll go over all that as well. Like the gear layouts are huge. People love those things.
Yeah, you have plenty of stories where it's like, hey, I've gotten so confident in my skills and abilities that you go ultra light, and it's like, you get stuck in a scenario where like, damn, that was like, I needed way more gear than I had. Cause if something went even worse than it did, it could have been real bad. So I'm on the mentality where, once again, gain as much knowledge as possible to carry as little gear as possible. And at the same time, understanding that there's some stuff that you're going to need to carry no matter what. So in the end, a big part of this is fitness. So always being able to kind of outweigh some of that issue of carrying too much gear, with just increasing your level of fitness to be able to carry that gear. Because some of the stuff you're not going to want to cut out, because no matter how much it weighs, because it's going to be essential for your survival.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's not just you. And that's something, as a guide, you learn quickly. And I'll give a scenario. I won't mention names, but something that happened to me this year with a client. We took off. It wasn't very far from camp. Got the animal on the ground. I was running really, as far as time hacks go, right? Like I have set times that I will not have someone pull the trigger because it's getting too late. Just safety things, and was pushing that limit on all of those times. And, physically the client was not doing well, trying to get back to camp, and it was fairly, not distance wise rough and not steep, but a lot of underbrush, a lot of tag alder. Got dark and it was sleeting pretty bad, like snaying, the worst kind, not snow, not rain, like the wet shit. And then it was a matter of, hey, pull your headlamp out. The client didn't think they had the headlamp and they found it. And then the batteries died quickly. So, in that case, like if I wouldn't have had a backup headlamp, I wouldn't have had backup batteries. You cannot proceed in certain situations at night without a headlamp. There's a danger assessment you have to make. And when I say that, meaning if you're going up waterfalls and cliffs and you can't see, and it's foggy and it's snowing rain or sleet rain, you have to make an assessment, which this is where all of these comes into play. You're going to have to make an assessment of what to do. And if you don't have the ability to build a fire, you are probably going to fucking die, right? Like it is a problem because now you can't move forward, but you also can't stay in place because you'll freeze to death. But so if you know you have what you need, and let's say the person didn't have a headlamp, but you know how to build a fire, you can at least last throughout the night. And then what is in your pack? Do you have a space blanket? Do you have extra clothing? What do you have? Food, you can last a couple, 3 weeks without eating. You won't be happy. But that's a big part of it. Until that happens to you, the light bulb sometimes does not come on of how vital this is to not only your livelihood, but your buddies or your clients or your spouse or girlfriend or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the perfect story for what we just talked about. And, on that is, when you go out in any of those scenarios and say you set up a base camp, and you're going to go out and continue your hunt for the day. You might be going out quite a few miles away from base camp. For me, I always am taking stuff with me that should I have to spend an inconvenient night away from camp, I'm able to do so kind of comfortably, but maybe a little uncomfortably depending on how cold it gets. But I'll always make sure I'm carrying some sort of water, navigational aids, a piece of cover to stop the rain or keep weather and wind off of me, some sort of insulative material, whether that's a poncho liner or a small sleeping bag or just a puff pant and puff jacket. So these academies are going to address all of that. This first one that's coming up, we haven't given the dates or anything yet to you guys, but it's going to be free. It's going to be open to the public. There will be a fitness requirement because it's going to be a little bit intensive with regard to that. But it's going to be limited as well. It's not going to be like, we expect 100 people to show up. We're not going to have that many cadre. So we're going to kind of limit it to 20 people max for this one. But that's exactly what the purpose of this course is. It's meant to be a little bit of a dick dragger, but at the same time, the purpose of that is so that you do have those moments of failure or of identifying faults in your gear that you need to fix, or seeing what we use or what other people use that you're like, oh shit, I didn't know that piece of kit was that useful. I'm going to add that to what I have, or I can really take this out of my pack because for some reason I packed a full, king size pillow in the bottom of my rucksack because I just really loved my pillow. And I take that on a backpack cut. So we want you to fail during these. We're going to identify those failure points, and we're just going to kind of address them and give you tools and tips on how to be better the next time.
Yeah, and those are, like, again, very basic, but, sometimes, again, eye-openers as far as, when you're going through those things. And I've found even, like, watching friends and clients set up their shelter, putting the stakes in backwards, not guying out the tent correctly, which when there's no wind is not a big deal. When you get high wind and snow load, those become very important things to know is simply how to guy out your tent, how to put the stake in correctly, how to rock it out if, maybe the stakes won't hold, how to build a stake if you lose one, to go build one on your own. I mean, it sounds simple, but I've done this long enough and seen people I've seen a lot of tents blow down. I've seen a lot of problems that could have been solved pretty easily. And the other thing we'll go through is kind of the assessment of, like we talked about the gear loadout. When you go ultra light and compare that to moderate weight, whatever, we'll do a lot of kind of assessment and dissecting of, hey, is 3 extra pounds, what does that bring you? Meaning, a lot of guys, if they go ultra light, if they bumped up their X, Y, and Z, the total weight increase in your pack is 3 pounds, but the safety and comfort of that 3 pounds is far well worth it. Right. So again, just kind of going through that, those type of things is what on this first course we're definitely going to cover.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Oh, I mean, the only other thing, like when we're talking about this stuff is again, my email's out there. It's aron@bornprimitive.com. We will have a way, whether you're emailing me or Kurt, once we kind of go through and pick the people that are going to go on this backpacking course. If you have questions on anything that Kurt and I are talking about, anything on the podcast, anything in general, email me. We're going to start answering a lot of these questions when I say we, Kurt will help some, but on the podcast or on certain videos where, I'm just going to either the first 20 minutes of the podcast, I'm just going to answer long form questions that I get in rather than trying to do it on a Q&A. If it's worth doing a video on, I'll do that. Because, when people have questions about gear, it's generally everybody, unless it's really wacko, everybody's going to have that same question. So getting it out there, maybe reminding me, of something I'm not thinking of, meaning, to answer is never a bad thing. So don't be afraid to email me on that. The only other thing that I want to cover, and Kurt touched on this, there's going to be a fitness requirement on this. It's not going to be as rigorous as the one course that we're going to have in June. But the biggest thing obviously with these, courses is we're going to want to have a fitness requirement. There's going to be specific gear you're going to need to bring. We'll go over that. And then after that, really just be kind of an open, book when you go to these courses. Like the one thing men are really bad at, it seems to me far worse than women, is kind of a muscling up, pretending they know everything. And the thing is, whether, I'm learning from Kurt something he's doing, primitive fire building, Kurt's learning from me, I don't know, stalking or whatever else. It's a lot better to keep your mouth shut and your ears open on courses like this with the instructors we have. And I'm only mentioning that because teaching some of these courses, you could have 10 guys and the 9 that are like asking question and all ears are going to take out a lot more from these courses. If you're going to show up maybe just to BS and pretend like you know everything, this may not be the course for you, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a little bit of that masculine posturing, which is, going to be expected kind of in this environment, but leave your ego at the door. We're all there just trying to help each other. If something that we're putting out is something you already know, you're tracking, just take it on board. Maybe there'll be a little tip in there that you don't know, and use your knowledge to help your buddy that you're with. Because, the stuff that we're going to do out there, we're going to make sure everybody's paired up and keep it as safe as possible. Because some of the places we'll have a pretty high threat with wild animals, predators. So, leave your ego at the door is kind of the thing I'm trying to get across.
Yeah. Same with me. And again, like if you can hike faster than everyone, and that's awesome, but we want to get there as a unit, as a team, as a group. We want to make sure everybody gets there at the same time. If we need to help our buddies, like this is literally, like it would be when when you're going in, if your hunting buddy can't make it, doesn't matter how fast you can go if he can't get there. So, keep that in mind. But is there anything else you want to cover? Anything I'm forgetting?
I'm sure there's something that we need to cover that we haven't, that regards to do you want to put out the first course dates, or should we just talk? I think we should probably talk about narrowing those down because we have a time frame. It'll be at the end of April, like you said, but I don't want to put out exact dates right now and then they'll change. But it'll be roughly that last weekend in April. We just aren't sure of how many nights we want to spend in the field. And again, like we keep throwing out fitness requirement. If you're on the fence, like please still reach out to us. Maybe you'll be good to go. Not all of the courses that we're going to put on this year are going to be very physically demanding. So there's definitely going to be some opportunities down the road where if you're not as physically fit, you'll still be able to come out to a course and learn some things without having to worry about getting your shit pushed into the ground. Something that we didn't mention is what'll probably be a part of almost every single one of these courses is some form of map and compass land navigation, whether that be terrain association, bringing out printed maps and using a compass to kind of navigate. We're big on using that tool outside of our digital navigational aids like watches and GPSs and Onyx or whatever you have on your phone. So just like the primitive skills, the modern stuff has its purpose, but in the event that stuff fails, you want to be able to revert back to some easier forms of navigation. It all just helps to increase situational awareness.
No, 100%. And again, we will cover some basics like Kurt just said on the land nav portion, but we will also have later on down the line an actual land nav, course. The biggest thing I think we'll cover, one of the things is terrain association's a big one, and it's super easy when you're in the field. You can go over a lot of pretty simplistic terrain association stuff. And anyway, you guys will see when you get there. So we will have the exact dates figured out this week, but it will be that, last week of April. We will have the destination. There will be a couple options, but we'll at least get you to the airport you need to be at. Most of that is, I don't want to post hole balls deep for 4 miles in. So some of it's going to be on snowpack, right? I do think, like joining the military, everyone should post hole for at least a mile once in their life, because you just haven't lived until you've done that. But I'd like to keep that at a minimum. But we'll have that ready to go. And then, as we're getting going on this, check out the YouTube page. We've got more and more tech tips and things like that popping up all the time. That's the Born Primitive Outdoor YouTube page. I've got a bunch of stuff up there already. Check out the podcast, Born Primitive Outdoor Podcast. We also have Born Primitive Tactical Podcast. That's more leadership and development, things like that. We have the Born Primitive Main podcast as well. So there's a lot of avenues to get information, but definitely the Born Primitive Outdoor Podcast will at least get you going with some knowledge before you head out into the field or head to these courses. So make sure and check those out as well. I'm supposed to start saying, make sure to subscribe. I'm horrible about that. Make sure to like all of our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube page. I think that's the first time I actually remember to say that.
They're nice.
Yeah,
you're winning.
Fuck, crushed it. So yeah, either way, I appreciate everybody tuning in. This was just kind of a quick one to talk about that first course. But we look forward to you coming out, and we will also at the end of the week get you guys emails or whatever to reach out to kind of apply for this first course. And again, that'll be out by the end of the week.
Fuck yeah.
All right. Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. Good talk.
Okay.